So we are still in our series on John 3:16. And this week we are looking at the second verb that is in the verse. We started, for God so loved. And today, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. When I was up at Crieff last year, there's a poster as you walk out of the dining hall, and it says, for God so loved the world that he gave. And it stopped right there. And God gives of himself, always, every day. And he doesn't just give us the edicts and the commandments. No, it says to us, God gave his one and only Son. The King James Version says, begotten. And I looked, yes, again at the Greek. They told me I'd use it. I didn't believe them. The word there is a really unique word for Greek, and it is monogenes. And it comes from mono, which is one or only, single, and genes means to be. So it is one who is being, or one who has come to be. And it also says that it also refers to miracles. So one who is the miracle. And it is used of Christ, and is also used only in the context of one and only child, son or daughter. And that is viewed in relationship to their parents. God gave his one and only Son. The people who would hear this in a patriarchal society would have been so confused. They would have been aghast because they had heard stories of one and only sons who were sacrificed or nearly given up. They would have heard of Abraham and Isaac, of Hannah and Samuel, and Elijah and John. Giving up a son would have been the height of idiocy to them. You see, in a patriarchal society, you were judged by how many children you had, and more particularly, how many sons you had. If you only had one son, that son would have been cherished and coddled and protected because it was the one who would carry on the name, the lineage for that family. And he would also be the one who cared for the extended family, the women and children. To have no male protector meant that you were at the mercy of society, that you were cast out, that you had to beg for a living. So to give up the only protection you had, to give up the only son who would carry on your name, would have been just this amazing thing for them. But he did. God gave his one and only Son. He was doing exactly the same as he had done throughout the Old Testament and what he had asked folks to do in the Old Testament, such as Abraham. He was doing it himself. And we can't even imagine giving up one of our children. Okay, maybe every once in a while we think about it. But I'm like, in context, I think to myself, it would be like families of people who serve in the military. You send your son or daughter off. You give them up to the greater good, never knowing what's going to happen. God knew what was going to happen. He knew what would be, and yet he gave us his one and only Son. He gave us himself because we know the Father and the Son are one. And there is no greater gift than to give of yourself, is there? To give your time and your attention to someone. To give everything for that one person. We do it for our children. And yet, there are times that we don't pay attention. We get so busy with our lives that, and I've seen it happen, instead of giving time and attention, we throw things at them. We give them that one-off experience, hoping to make up for all that time that we didn't spend. We shower them with gifts or toys or video games, thinking that's going to make up for the time that we didn't spend with them. I made those mistakes. I was so busy building a business, very driven, very focused, that I didn't give my kids all the time that I should have. I know that. Do I regret it? Absolutely. And I've asked them about this. Mostly they tell me I'm crazy, but they tell me that all the time. But I think it makes a difference in the relationships that you have. And we find that with our spouses or our friends as well. If we're giving them perfunctory answers, if we're only getting the superficial, if we're not paying attention, they know it. And that closeness starts to deteriorate. And it seems like you are ships passing in the night. Did you take the kids? Will you pick up the groceries? Instead of the conversations and the attention that we need to be showering on the other. And we do it with our parents as well as they get older. We give them the call, quick call, how are you doing? Fine, good, all right. Rather than having the conversation, rather than paying attention. They're fine. This paying attention thing. God is paying attention. And what his people needed was not more edicts or commandments. What they needed was his presence with them. They had come through thousands of years hearing from God through his word, through the prophets, through the commandments and the proclamations, by proxies. But now he needed to be with them, to pay attention to them in the flesh, to herald a whole new way of being. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only, his begotten, the flesh. How does it feel to be the recipient of that kind of gift? You should feel important and cherished, because that's how he wants you to feel. Because if you are not feeling important and cherished, you're not getting it. If you're not feeling important and cherished in your relationships, it's a very lonely feeling, isn't it? Think about great gifts, the greatest gift you ever got. And was it significant because of how much it was worth? Probably not. It was the gift that made you feel important and cherished, that someone paid attention to you enough that they knew what would make you happy. The year before my dad passed away, he couldn't go shopping for Christmas. And he said to me, I want something special. Because I'm sure that he knew that he wouldn't be around for another Christmas. And he sent me shopping. And I said, well, how much do you want to spend? Doesn't matter. Okay. And so I head to the one place that women will head to, the jewelry store, of course. And I found this pendant, an eternity pendant. It was gold and it had diamonds all the way around it. And I took a picture of it and I sent it to my dad. And I said, what do you think? And he said, yeah, this is eternity. And it's important. And my mom wears it constantly. Not because of how much it was worth, but because what it stood for. that he would take the energy that he didn't have just to send me. But still, he could have gone and done nothing. Eternity is the gift God is offering us. This is the symbol for us. And it means so much more than the most pricey metals or the costliest jewels. Here we see in the Son the true value of God's love for us. Not only was he willing to give, but he was willing to give the only one he had. When you give out of your abundance, that's certainly amazing. But when you give out of your poverty, that's something else entirely. When you have a bunch of vehicles and you give away one or two, like Ellen is wont to do on her show, that's great and it's noble. But if you only have one vehicle and you give it to someone so that they can get to the job that they need to make a living for their family, that's certainly something else entirely. How many of you have ever heard or have maybe even said it yourself? I can't give you that. It's the only one I've got. And a few weeks ago, I offered the kids caramels. You remember? And I said to them, would you give it away? And some would, and some wouldn't. And I wonder if that's what we're teaching the next generation. It's something to think about. God is teaching us a different lesson. He wants us to hear, he wants us to learn that he didn't have a backup. He only had one son. He didn't have a spare. And he was willing to give us the one that he had, the only begotten. And it's not some abstract concept. It's not some theological construct. It's real. It's life. And God's love was made real through Jesus Christ in this world. He came into the world to show us love. He came into the world so we would know that kind of sacrificial love. There was a little boy once trying to quote this John 3:16 verse in the King James Version, which says his only begotten son. But the child misquoted it and said his only forgotten son. It's one of those slips of the tongue that carried more truth than we like to think about. Because for many in this world, he is forgotten. His life is forgotten. His love is forgotten. His sacrifice is forgotten. And it is our job as Christians, as the verse said, as ambassadors of Christ, to make sure that he is not forgotten, that we recognize the only begotten, not forgotten. I came across this story this week as I was researching. There was a man who was a drunk. His name was Joe. And he was miraculously converted in a street mission to Christ. And before his conversion, he gained a reputation as a derelict and a dirty wino for whom there was absolutely no hope. But following his conversion to Christ, everything changed. And Joe worked at the mission, doing anything and everything. He became the most caring person that was there. He spent his days and his nights doing what needed to be done, and it didn't matter what it was. He would clean up the vomit that the drunks spewed on the floor. He would help people to get themselves out of the colds and dressed and ready for bed when they were so out of it they didn't even know what they were doing. He would be counted on to feed the men that came in even if he went without supper himself. One evening, the evangelist was going on, and he was delivering his message to the usual crowd of sullen men who were just there because they knew they had to sit through that before they could get fed. And they were downtrodden, and they were sitting there. And some of them were pleading with God to help them make a change. And there was one man who came up to the altar, and he kneeled down and he cried out to God. And he kept shouting, "Oh God, make me like Joe. Make me like Joe. Make me like Joe." And the preacher leaned over and said, "Son, don't you think it would be better to say, 'Make me like Jesus'?" And the drunk looked up and said, "Oh, is he like Joe?" It's a great story, but it's a powerful way to live, to model Christ. Are you living your life in a way that says that you have not forgotten the gift you've been given? Max Lucado, that we've been reading his book, he writes, "There are many reasons God saves you: to bring glory to himself, to appease his justice, to demonstrate his sovereignty. But one of the sweetest reasons God saved you is because he's fond of you. He likes having you around. He thinks you are the best thing to come down the pike for quite a while. If God had a refrigerator, your picture would be on it. If God had a wallet, your photo would be in it. He sends you flowers every spring and a sunrise every morning. Whenever you want to talk, he'll listen. He can live anywhere in the universe, and he chooses to live in your heart. And the Christmas gift he sent you in Bethlehem? Face it, friend, he's crazy about you." The verse that we read, or that Bob read, says, "Christ died for all so that those who live would not continue to live for themselves. He died for them and was raised from the dead so that they would live for him. We have been sent to speak for Christ. It is as if God is calling to you through us. For God so loved the world, for God so loves you, that he gave you his one and only Son, the most extravagant gift he could, his one and only. What are you doing with that gift?" Amen.